I'm about to tell you a story that could be a plot to the next Indiana Jones movie. A story full of ancient temples and a cursed jewel that was actually stolen from the crown of a temple god's altar statue. It was so cursed that it was locked away for over 40 years to keep it from harming anyone else. Then the stone was donated to a museum and forgotten for almost another 30 years. It was placed in a museum, in a cabinet, in a drawer, and forgotten about, until the museum curator happened across it, and along with the stone was a letter dated back from 1904 explaining where it came from and the curse that went along with it. So what's the cursed jewel I'm talking about? You will have to stick around to find out. 1857, India was thrown into chaos when there was a mutiny against the British. It was called the Sepoy Mutiny, and it was the first war of independence in India. It started in Meerut and spread to Delhi, Agra, Lucknow, and Kanpur. The British wanted to send a clear message by suppressing the mutiny with brutal force. The British caused destruction and death in their wake. More than 800,000 Indian men, women, and children were killed during the uprising. At this time, the British ransacked holy temples and the palaces of India's richest citizens for treasure. This is when, in the Temple of Indra in Kanpur, a British soldier pried the stone from the crown of an altar statue for the god Indra. Indra is the god of war and the god of storms, especially thunder and lightning storms. He is depicted as riding a big white elephant, and he carries a lightning bolt in his hand. This is definitely not a god you wanted to make mad. The soldier, being part of the Bengal cavalry, immediately took the stone that he had stolen to his commanding officer, Colonel W. Ferris. Colonel Ferris then in turn took the stone back to England with him, back to his family home. Almost immediately after bringing the stone home, he and his family started to suffer misfortune after misfortune financially, and then they started suffering with a lot of health problems. When Colonel Ferris died, eventually it was passed on to his son. His son, not believing in curses, loaned it to a friend, and the weird thing is right after the friend took it home with him, without warning or any type of signs, the friend committed suicide. The stone was then returned to the son of Colonel Ferris, as stated in the now deceased man's will. The son of Colonel Ferris desperately wanted to get rid of it at this point, so then he gave it to Edward Heron-Allen. This happened around 1890. Edward Heron-Allen was an author, and coincidentally, he was also a good friend of Oscar Wilde. He was known to be a scholar of polymath, a writer, and a scientist. He was also a member of a secret society called the Rosicrucians. So at this point, I think he thought that he could handle a curse, being that he knew a lot about the occult and being a member of the society. But from the moment he took possession of the stone, he started to have his own series of misfortune. He was having financial difficulties, and he too was starting to suffer from health problems. So in a desperate attempt to try to counteract the curse, he took things that he had to a jeweler on Wardour Street in London. He had the stone set in a silver snake ring that was previously owned by Hayden the astrologer. He was a 17th century known occultist at the time. He also had small plaques placed around the edge of the stone where the snake ring meets with different astrological signs on it. He then added 2 pendants to the original stone in the setting. One was a silver Tao symbol that was Hayden the astrologer's. The other held in place 2 amethyst scarabs that were evidently from Queen Hatsu's period. Both editions were brought from Dur el Bahari in Thebes. This attempt seemed to quiet the curse, but it didn't get rid of it entirely. It seemed they were still plagued by a Hindu spirit that was still attached to the stone. In the letter that he addressed with the stone that the museum found, Heron-Allen describes this spirit as what they call a yogi, but he was covered in ash and he had glowing red eyes. It was said that he wandered his home looking for something. It also would go into his library and kind of sit in the corner on its heels and dig at the ground with its claws like it was searching for the stone in the library. In 1902, he reluctantly lent the stone to a friend. The family then suffered the same series of misfortunate events with finances and health problems, and they were so desperate to get rid of it that they actually left it in his home while he was away in Egypt for something. After that, Heron-Allen was done with the stone. So he runs all the way down to the Regent Canal, throws it in the river, and thinks he's done with it. This was in 1903. A little later, they were working on cleaning the canal out, and a dredger actually found the stone. He takes the stone, he's looking for a quick buck, and he takes it to a jeweler and sells it for cash. Well, coincidentally, it happens to be the same jeweler on Walter Street that Heron-Allen hired to do the work to kind of try to contain the curse in the first place. And the jeweler, knowing, because he sees his own work, he knows it belongs to Heron-Allen, thinks somehow it got lost, and so he gives it back to him as a show of kindness. This happened only 3 months after he initially tossed it in the canal in the first place. It comes all the way back to him in some freaky, coincidental way. Now later, he reluctantly loans it to another friend. She sings publicly, but after wearing the stone a brief time, she was never able to sing again. And each time something happened and the stone was returned to him, of course the haunting started again, and some of the misfortune returned to him and his family. Now, when Edward Heron-Allen had his first daughter, he had 2 daughters, but when he had his first daughter, he was so worried about the curse affecting her, and he felt like it was already starting to affect her, that he felt like he had to do something. So obviously he's tried to give the stone away, he's tried to throw it away in a river, and it came back. So he feels like the only recourse that he has is maybe attempting to lock it away so it can't affect his daughters in the future. He placed it in not one lockbox, but he nested it inside of 7 lockboxes, all containing different talismans and lucky charms to try to contain the curse. He then takes the 7 nested lockboxes to his bankers, and he puts it in a safety deposit box. Now, along with, in the smallest of the box, so it's the stone in the 7 boxes, the smallest box, he puts a letter. And it explains the history of where the stone comes from and the curse associated with it. He also left very detailed instructions on what to do with the stone, that the stone should never see the light of day for 33 years after he dies. And no matter what happens, his daughters are not to see the stone or touch the stone in any way. It sat there until 1944 when the Heron-Allen finally passes away. So it sat there for almost 40 years without being touched. Now his daughters, wanting rid of the stone as soon as possible, donated a couple months after his death to the Natural History Museum in London. The stone somehow gets placed back in its original box. Don't know whatever happened to the other 6 boxes or the talismans and omens that it was packed in, but it gets put in a box with a letter. It gets put in a cabinet drawer in storage and forgotten about. It's lost for almost another 30 years. It was rediscovered in 1972 by the curator at the time. His name was Peter Tandy. It turns out the purple sapphire isn't even a sapphire at all. It's actually an amethyst that was mislabeled in the 19th century. Part of the letter that was left with the stone states, "To whomever shall be the future possessor of this amethyst, these lines are addressed in mourning, before he or she shall assume the responsibility of owning it. This stone is terribly cursed and stained with blood, and the dishonor of all those that have owned it before. I feel that it's exuding a baleful influence on my newborn daughter, so I'm now packing it in 7 boxes and depositing it at my bankers, with directions that it not see the light of day until 33 years after my death. Whoever shall open it shall first read this warning, and then do so as they please with the jewel. My advice to him or her is to cast it into the sea. I am forbidden by the Rosicrucian oath to do so, or I would have done it long ago. Signed, Edward Heron-Allen, October 1904. The stone went on display in 2007 in a section of the Natural History Museum there, referred to as the Vault. It is still there, but there's certain workers at the museum that are still hesitant about the stone, and they actually refuse to touch it or mess with it. During an episode of the History Channel's Museum Secrets, Ivra Jones, who's the grandson of Heron-Allen, they actually convinced him to see the stone in person, though he did so very reluctantly. He hasn't seen the stone in decades. He stated in the show that the family does not want the stone back. It was given to the museum without strings attached, and it's up to the museum what is done with it. But he did give his opinion that they should find whatever Hindu god that it was stolen from and give it back. He also refused to touch it and stated that no one in his family would ever want to touch that stone. John E. Whitaker also had his own experience with the stone. He's a member of the Edward Heron-Allen Society, and he was transporting this stone to a symposium. He and his wife traveled with it by car to discuss Heron-Allen's life at the symposium. On their way, in his words, the sky turned black, and we were overtaken by the most horrific thunderstorm I've ever experienced, he said. They were trapped in their car by such a violent storm, he had never seen anything like it before or since this occurrence. It was so bad that they considered abandoning the car. My wife was shouting, "Why did you bring this damn thing?" The night before the second symposium, he got a stomach bug and was taken violently ill. He missed the third symposium because he got a kidney stone and unfortunately had a lot of pain and suffering after that. They had a fourth symposium in 2004, but it was at the museum. We were all apprehensive about the meeting, he said. Now, curator Richard Savin, he and his wife were also driving the jewel to and from a symposium for the Edward Heron-Allen Society. In his words, "We drove through the most amazing storm I had ever witnessed. The lightning was flashing on both sides of the car, and my wife was shouting at me, 'Throw that damn thing away, you shouldn't have brought it.'" He noted that any time he has tried to travel with the stone since then, he has gotten violently ill. Though, of course, it could all just be a coincidence. So what do you think? Are curses real? If given the chance, would you hold the stone in your hand and claim it as your own? Should it stay at the museum, or do you think it should be returned to India and the god Indra? Would that end the curse that has plagued so many? I would love to hear your thoughts on the subject, so please comment below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for all your support. Until next time, bye-bye.